The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as King Charles sat in his private study, carefully reviewing a stack of official documents. His reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he studied each paper, with the attention to detail that had become his trademark since ascending to the throne. The weight of the crown had taught him that every decision, no matter how small, could ripple through the monarchy and beyond. Queen Camilla entered the room quietly, carrying a silver tray with his favorite Earl Grey tea and digestive biscuits. She had learned his morning routines well over the years, understanding that these quiet moments together were precious before the day's royal duties began. Setting the tray down on the mahogany desk, she noticed the particularly serious expression on her husband's face. "You look troubled this morning, darling," Camilla observed, settling into the comfortable armchair across from his desk. She had grown accustomed to reading Charles's moods, especially during his first year as monarch when the pressures seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders. Charles looked up from his papers, removing his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. The past few months had been challenging for the royal family, with various public appearances and state duties requiring careful coordination. However, something else had been occupying his thoughts lately, something that he knew would surprise everyone, including his wife. "I've been considering something important," Charles said slowly, his voice carrying the measured tone he used when discussing matters of significance, "something that I believe is long overdue and necessary for the future of our monarchy." Camilla raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the mysterious nature of his words. In all their years together, she had learned to recognize when Charles was planning something significant. His careful choice of words and the way he seemed to be weighing each phrase told her that whatever he was considering would have considerable impact. The king stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the palace gardens where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom. The sight of new growth seemed fitting for what he was contemplating, a fresh chapter, for the royal family that would acknowledge the changing times and the evolving role of the monarchy in modern Britain. "It's about Princess Kate," he continued, his back still turned to Camilla. "I've been watching her over the past few years, observing how she's handled her royal duties, how she's supported William, and how the public has embraced her. She's proven herself to be an invaluable asset to our family and to the crown." Camilla felt a slight unease settling in her stomach, though she couldn't quite pinpoint why. Kate had indeed been a model royal, gracefully handling her transition from commoner to duchess and eventually to princess. Her charitable work, her dedication to her children, and her unwavering support of the monarchy had earned her widespread admiration. "What exactly are you thinking?" Camilla asked, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the growing concern she felt. Charles turned back to face his wife, his expression serious but determined. "I'm considering bestowing upon her a special honor, one that has never been given to someone in her position before. It would be a public recognition of her exceptional service and a signal of the monarchy's evolution." The room fell silent except for the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. Camilla processed her husband's words, understanding immediately that whatever he was planning would be unprecedented and potentially controversial. The royal family had always been bound by tradition and protocol, and any deviation from established customs was sure to generate significant attention. "Charles," Camilla said carefully, "you know how important it is to maintain the delicate balance within our family. Any special recognition, particularly one that's unprecedented, could be interpreted in various ways by both the family and the public." The king nodded, acknowledging his wife's concerns. He had anticipated this reaction, and had spent many sleepless nights considering all the potential ramifications of his decision. However, he had become increasingly convinced that bold action was necessary to ensure the monarchy's relevance and appeal to future generations. "I understand your reservations," Charles replied, returning to his desk and picking up a particular document that had been occupying his attention. "But I believe this is exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach our monarchy needs. Kate represents the future, and recognizing her contributions now will demonstrate our commitment to merit over mere tradition." Camilla studied her husband's face, recognizing the determined set of his jaw that appeared whenever he had made up his mind about something important. She had seen this expression before during their courtship, when he had decided to pursue their relationship despite public criticism, and again when he had chosen to modernize certain aspects of royal protocol after becoming king. "What specific honor are you considering?" she asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Charles smiled for the first time that morning, a smile that held both excitement and a hint of mischief. "I'm planning to make her a Lady of the Garter, the highest order of chivalry in Britain. She would be the youngest person ever to receive this honor, and it would place her among the most distinguished members of the British establishment." The magnitude of what Charles was proposing hit Camilla like a physical blow. The Order of the Garter was indeed the most prestigious honor in the British system, traditionally reserved for senior royals, distinguished politicians, and military leaders who had served for decades. For Kate to receive this honor at her age and relatively early in her royal career would be absolutely shocking. Camilla's mind raced through the implications. How would other senior royals react? What would the media make of such an unprecedented move? Most importantly, how would this affect the carefully maintained hierarchy within the royal family? These questions swirled in her head as she struggled to find the right words to express her concerns without appearing to oppose her husband's judgment. The silence in the study stretched on as Camilla absorbed the full weight of her husband's announcement. The Order of the Garter was not just any honor. It was the pinnacle of British chivalry, established by King Edward III in 1348. The very idea of Kate receiving such recognition at this stage of her royal career was revolutionary, and Camilla could already envision the chaos it would create within royal circles. "Charles, you must understand how this will be perceived," Camilla finally said, her voice strained with barely contained emotion. "There are members of our family who have served the crown for decades and have never received such recognition. Your own sister, Anne, has been the hardest working royal for years, and even she hasn't been honored in this way." The king's expression remained resolute, though Camilla could see that her words had given him pause. Princess Anne indeed had been a tireless servant to the crown, carrying out more engagements than almost any other royal family member year after year. The comparison was not lost on Charles, but he had already considered this aspect of his decision. Anne's contributions are immeasurable, and she will receive appropriate recognition in due time, Charles replied diplomatically. "But Kate represents something different. She's the future queen consort, the mother of our future king, and she's captured the public imagination in a way that's crucial for our monarchy's survival." Camilla stood up abruptly, her usual composure beginning to crack. The implications of Charles's words were becoming clearer, and she didn't like what she was hearing. It seemed to her that Kate was being elevated not just for her service, but for her popularity and her position as William's wife. This felt like a dangerous precedent that could undermine the traditional structures that had kept the monarchy stable for centuries. "And what about protocol?" Camilla demanded, her voice rising slightly. "What about the careful balance we've worked so hard to maintain? You're talking about turning centuries of tradition on its head for someone who's been in the family for barely more than a decade." Charles set down his papers and looked directly at his wife, recognizing that they were approaching a significant disagreement. In their years together, they had rarely found themselves on opposite sides of important issues, but this matter was clearly testing the boundaries of their partnership. "Camilla, the monarchy's survival depends on our ability to adapt and evolve," he said firmly. "Kate has proven herself in ways that go far beyond traditional measurements of royal service. Her work with mental health awareness, her dedication to early childhood development, and her natural ability to connect with people of all backgrounds make her invaluable to our future." But Camilla was not convinced. In her mind, Charles was allowing his desire to modernize the monarchy to cloud his judgment about family dynamics and royal hierarchy. She had worked hard to find her place within the royal family, enduring years of public scrutiny and criticism before finally being accepted. The idea that Kate could leapfrog over senior family members felt like a betrayal of everything she had endured. "You're being naive, Charles," Camilla said sharply, her frustration finally boiling over. "This isn't just about Kate's qualifications or popularity. This is about sending a message to the entire family about who matters and who doesn't. You're essentially saying that youth and public appeal matter more than years of dedicated service." The king was taken aback by the intensity of his wife's reaction. He had expected some resistance to his plans, but the depth of Camilla's opposition surprised him. He could see the hurt in her eyes, and he began to understand that this issue touched on deeper insecurities about her own position within the royal hierarchy. "This isn't about diminishing anyone else's contributions," Charles said, trying to adopt a more conciliatory tone. "It's about recognizing exceptional merit when we see it. Kate has exceeded every expectation we had for her, and I believe that deserves acknowledgement." Camilla turned away from her husband, walking to the window where he had stood moments earlier. The beautiful garden view that had seemed so peaceful now felt like a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside the palace walls. She could already imagine the media frenzy that would follow such an announcement, the speculation about what it meant for other family members, and the inevitable comparisons that would be drawn. "Have you discussed this with William?" she asked, her voice now controlled but cold. "Does he know that you're planning to thrust his wife into such a prominent position?" Charles shook his head. "I wanted to finalize my thinking before involving anyone else, but I'm confident that William will support the decision. He's seen firsthand how Kate has embraced her royal duties and how effectively she's represented the crown." "And what about the other senior royals?" Camilla pressed. "Have you considered how Anne will feel when she learns that her decades of service have been overlooked in favor of someone who's been in the family for such a short time? What about Edward and Sophie, who have quietly and faithfully served without seeking the spotlight?" These questions struck at the heart of Charles's dilemma. He genuinely respected and valued the service of all his family members, but he also felt a responsibility to position the monarchy for future success. In his view, Kate represented the key to maintaining the crown's relevance and appeal in an increasingly modern world. "Every decision a monarch makes creates winners and losers," Charles said quietly. "But I have to consider what's best for the institution as a whole, not just individual feelings. Kate's honor would send a powerful message about the kind of monarchy we want to be going forward." Camilla turned back to face her husband, her expression now showing both anger and disappointment. She had hoped that Charles would consider her concerns more seriously, but it was becoming clear that his mind was already made up. The realization that her husband was willing to proceed despite her strong objections felt like a fundamental shift in their relationship. The tension in the room had become so thick that even the morning sunlight seemed unable to penetrate the growing coldness between the royal couple. Camilla realized that this conversation was about much more than just an honor for Kate. It was about the future direction of the monarchy and her own place within it. The feeling of being sidelined in such a major decision was devastating to her sense of partnership with Charles. "You've already made up your mind, haven't you?" Camilla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This conversation isn't about seeking my advice or opinion. You're simply informing me of what you've decided to do." Charles felt a pang of guilt at his wife's words because there was truth in them. While he valued Camilla's input on most matters, he had indeed reached his conclusion about Kate's honor before discussing it with her. The weight of his royal responsibilities sometimes made him forget that marriage required genuine consultation, not just notification. "Camilla, please understand that this decision comes from my responsibility as king," he said, trying to bridge the growing gap between them. "Sometimes I have to make choices that may not be popular with everyone, including those closest to me." But his words only seemed to deepen Camilla's sense of isolation. She had spent years supporting Charles through his most difficult moments, standing by him during public criticism and helping him navigate the complexities of royal life. Now, when he was making one of the most significant decisions of his reign, she felt completely excluded from the process. "I see," Camilla said coolly, moving toward the door. "Well then, I suppose there's nothing more to discuss. You've made your decision as king, and I must simply accept it as your wife." The formality in her tone alarmed Charles more than any angry outburst could have. He recognized this pattern from their past disagreements. When Camilla felt truly hurt, she withdrew into a cold politeness that was far more damaging than heated arguments. "Camilla, wait," he called out as she reached for the door handle. "Don't leave like this. We need to work through this together." She paused but didn't turn around. "There's nothing to work through, Charles. You've made it clear that this matter is beyond discussion. I'm sure Princess Kate will be appropriately grateful for your unprecedented generosity." The sarcasm in her final words cut deep. and Charles realized that he had severely underestimated how strongly his wife would react to his plans. As the door closed behind Camilla with a soft but definitive click, he was left alone with his papers and his doubts. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, Princess Kate was completely unaware of the royal drama unfolding across London. She was in her private sitting room, reviewing her schedule for the upcoming week with her private secretary. The morning light filtered through the elegant windows as she discussed her various charitable commitments and official engagements. "Your Royal Highness, we've received several requests for additional appearances next month," her secretary informed her, flipping through a thick folder of invitations and proposals. "The Children's Hospital in Manchester is particularly hoping you might visit their new mental health wing." Kate nodded thoughtfully, always eager to support causes related to children's welfare and mental health. These issues had become her passion during her time as a royal, and she had worked hard to use her platform to bring attention to often overlooked problems affecting young people. "I'd like to make that happen if possible," Kate replied, making a note in her personal diary. "Children's mental health is so important, and if our visit can help raise awareness and funding, then it's definitely worthwhile." Her genuine enthusiasm for her royal duties had become one of her most admired qualities. Unlike some members of the royal family who seemed to view their obligations as burdens to be endured, Kate approached each engagement with authentic interest and energy. This attitude had not gone unnoticed by King Charles, who had been impressed by her dedication from the very beginning. Prince William entered the room just as Kate finished her morning meeting. He kissed his wife on the cheek and settled into the chair across from her, looking relaxed and content. Their partnership, both personal and professional, had become one of the monarchy's greatest assets, representing a modern and relatable face of the royal family. "How's your morning been?" William asked, stealing a piece of toast from her breakfast tray. "You look like you're planning to take over the world with your charitable work." Kate laughed, appreciating her husband's support and humor. "Just trying to make a difference where I can. Speaking of which, have you heard anything from your father lately? He seemed quite preoccupied during our last family dinner." William shrugged, not thinking much of his father's recent behavior. King Charles had always been a deep thinker, prone to periods of intense contemplation about his royal duties and the future of the monarchy. It wasn't unusual for him to seem distracted when he was working through important decisions. "You know, Father, he's always got something brewing in that mind of his," William said casually. "Probably planning some new initiative or reform. He's been quite focused on modernizing the monarchy since he became king." Neither William nor Kate could have imagined that they were the subject of Charles's latest modernization effort, or that their lives were about to be dramatically affected by the king's controversial decision. The calm morning at Kensington Palace stood in stark contrast to the emotional turmoil that had erupted at Buckingham Palace just hours earlier. Back at Buckingham Palace, Camilla had retreated to her private apartments, her mind racing with the implications of her husband's announcement. She paced back and forth across her sitting room, trying to process not just the news itself but the way it had been delivered. The feeling of being treated as an afterthought in such a significant decision was almost unbearable. Her lady-in-waiting, sensing the Queen's distress, quietly brought her a cup of tea and retreated without comment. Camilla appreciated the discretion. She needed time to think through her response to this situation. The honor Charles was planning for Kate would undoubtedly be seen as a slight by other senior royals, and Camilla would inevitably be asked for her opinion on the matter. As the day progressed, the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace remained tense. King Charles had attempted to focus on his scheduled meetings and official duties, but his mind kept returning to the confrontation with Camilla. He realized that he had handled the situation poorly, treating a decision that would affect the entire royal family as if it were his alone to make. During his afternoon meeting with his private secretary, Charles found himself distracted and unable to concentrate on the various matters requiring his attention. State papers that usually received his careful consideration were given only cursory glances, and he found himself checking his watch repeatedly, wondering when might be an appropriate time to attempt reconciliation with his wife. "Your Majesty, shall we postpone the remaining items until tomorrow?" his secretary suggested diplomatically, having noticed the king's obvious preoccupation. "Perhaps you have more pressing matters to attend to this afternoon." Charles nodded gratefully, realizing that his mental state was not conducive to making important decisions about state matters. He dismissed his secretary and sat alone in his office, contemplating the best way to approach Camilla. Their argument had revealed deeper issues about communication and partnership that needed to be addressed. Meanwhile, Camilla had spent the afternoon in her private garden, finding solace among the carefully tended roses and flowering shrubs that had become her refuge during difficult times. The physical act of tending to her plants helped calm her mind and provided the space she needed to think through the morning's revelations. She understood that Charles's position as king required him to make difficult decisions, but she had expected to be treated as a true partner in matters affecting the royal family. The realization that he had developed such a significant plan without consulting her felt like a fundamental breach of trust in their relationship. A message arrived requesting her presence at dinner, but Camilla chose to have her meal served in her private apartments instead. She wasn't ready to sit across from Charles and pretend that everything was normal when their relationship felt fundamentally altered by the morning's events. News of the royal couple's tension began to spread quietly through the palace staff, as it always did when there were disagreements among the senior royals. Servants who had worked in the palace for years recognized the signs: canceled joint appearances, meals taken separately, and a general atmosphere of careful politeness that replaced the usual warmth between the king and queen. Princess Anne, who had always prided herself on being well-informed about family matters, noticed the subtle changes during her evening visit to Buckingham Palace. She had come to discuss her upcoming tour of Scotland, but the unusual atmosphere in the palace caught her attention immediately. "Is everything quite all right?" Anne asked her brother during their brief meeting. Her direct nature and years of experience had taught her to address issues head-on, rather than dancing around obvious problems. Charles hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about his conflict with Camilla. He knew that Anne would eventually learn about his plans for Kate, and he wondered if discussing the matter with his sister might provide valuable perspective on how other family members might react. "I've been considering some changes that Camilla finds challenging," Charles admitted carefully. "Decisions about recognizing excellence within our family in new and unprecedented ways." Anne raised an eyebrow, immediately sensing that there was much more to the story than her brother was revealing. Her years of royal service had given her a keen understanding of family dynamics and the delicate balance required to maintain harmony among the various personalities and interests within the royal household. "Charles, you know that any significant changes to family protocols need to be carefully considered," Anne said firmly. "Our family has enough challenges without creating new sources of tension through hasty decisions." Her words echoed Camilla's concerns, and Charles began to wonder if his plans were indeed as well considered as he had believed. The negative reactions from both his wife and his sister suggested that he might have underestimated the complexity of implementing such a dramatic change to royal tradition. At the same time, in their Kensington Palace residence, William and Kate were enjoying a quiet evening with their children. The peaceful domestic scene represented everything that Charles hoped to protect and promote through his decision to honor Kate. Her natural approach to royal duties and her ability to balance public service with family life had impressed him tremendously. After putting the children to bed, Kate and William settled in their private sitting room to discuss their upcoming engagements. Kate mentioned her conversation with her secretary about the children's hospital visit, and William shared details about his own charitable commitments for the following month. "I've been thinking about expanding my work with mental health initiatives," Kate said thoughtfully. "There's so much more we could be doing to support young people who are struggling with anxiety and depression." William nodded, admiring his wife's passion for causes that truly mattered to her. "Father has always said that the monarchy's future depends on our ability to serve meaningful purposes in people's lives. Your work in this area definitely fits that vision." Neither of them realized how prophetic William's words were, or that King Charles was at that very moment struggling with how to implement his vision for Kate's enhanced role within the royal family. The honor he was planning would indeed elevate her profile and provide a platform for expanded influence. But the cost in terms of family harmony was proving to be higher than he had anticipated. As the evening wore on, Charles finally decided that he could no longer avoid addressing the situation with Camilla. He made his way to her private apartments, hoping that the passage of time might have softened her anger and made productive conversation possible. He knocked gently on her door and was surprised when she opened it immediately, as if she had been expecting his visit. Her expression was composed but distant, showing none of the warmth that usually characterized their interactions. "I think we need to talk," Charles said quietly, hoping that she would agree to continue their earlier conversation in a more constructive manner. Camilla stepped aside to let him enter, but her body language remained formal and unwelcoming. The comfortable intimacy that usually defined their private moments together had been replaced by a careful politeness that felt more damaging than open hostility. "I've spent the afternoon thinking about our conversation this morning," Camilla said, settling into her favorite armchair, but not inviting Charles to sit. "And I've come to some conclusions about what this really means for our family and our marriage." Charles felt his heart sink at the formal tone in Camilla's voice. The woman who had been his closest confidant and strongest supporter for so many years now seemed like a stranger, speaking to him with the same careful politeness she might use with a visiting dignitary. He realized that the damage from their morning argument ran much deeper than he had initially understood. "Camilla, please let me explain my reasoning more fully," Charles began, taking a tentative step closer to her chair. "I never intended to exclude you from this decision or to diminish your importance to me and to the crown." But Camilla held up her hand, stopping him before he could continue. Her afternoon of reflection had crystallized her thoughts about what had transpired, and she was determined to have her say before listening to any explanations or apologies. "Charles, this isn't really about Kate or even about the honor you're planning to give her," Camilla said with surprising calmness. "This is about trust, partnership, and respect. When you develop major plans that affect our family without consulting me, you're telling me that my opinion doesn't matter to you." The accuracy of her assessment hit Charles like a physical blow. He had been so focused on the merits of his decision regarding Kate that he had completely overlooked the impact his approach would have on his relationship with his wife. The irony wasn't lost on him that in trying to strengthen the monarchy, he had potentially damaged the most important partnership in his personal life. "You're absolutely right," Charles admitted, sitting down heavily in the chair across from her. "I became so convinced of the rightness of my decision that I forgot to consider how my approach would affect you. That was thoughtless and disrespectful." Camilla studied her husband's face, seeing genuine remorse but also recognizing that the fundamental issue remained unresolved. His apology for his approach didn't address her concerns about the decision itself or what it would mean for family dynamics going forward. "And what about the actual decision?" she asked pointedly. "Are you still planning to proceed with this unprecedented honor for Kate, regardless of how it might affect other family members?" Charles paused, realizing that this was the crucial moment in their conversation. His answer would determine not only the future of his plans for Kate, but also the future of his relationship with Camilla. He could see that she was waiting for him to demonstrate that he valued her input enough to genuinely reconsider his position. "I'm willing to postpone any announcement until we can discuss this more thoroughly," Charles said carefully, "and I want to hear your specific concerns about why you think this decision might be harmful to the family." For the first time since their morning argument, Camilla's expression softened slightly. While she wasn't entirely satisfied with his response, she recognized that he was at least willing to engage in a real discussion, rather than simply defending his predetermined decision. "My concerns go beyond just family feelings, although those are important," Camilla explained. "When you give such an extraordinary honor to someone so early in their royal career, you're setting a precedent that could undermine the entire system of recognition and achievement that has served the monarchy for centuries." Charles nodded thoughtfully, beginning to see the broader implications of his decision that he had perhaps not fully considered. In his enthusiasm for modernizing the monarchy and recognizing Kate's exceptional qualities, he might have overlooked the importance of maintaining systems that provided motivation and structure for all family members. "Furthermore," Camilla continued, "you're putting Kate in an extremely difficult position. She'll be seen as jumping ahead of senior family members who have served longer and worked just as hard. That kind of resentment could poison family relationships for years to come." This perspective gave Charles pause. He had been so focused on the positive aspects of honoring Kate that he hadn't fully considered how it might affect her relationships with other family members. The last thing he wanted was to create divisions that would weaken the royal family's unity and effectiveness. I hadn't thought about it from Kate's perspective, Charles admitted. You're right that it could put her in a very uncomfortable position, especially with Anne and the others. As they continued their conversation, both Charles and Camilla began to recognize that they were dealing with fundamental questions about leadership, tradition and change that went far beyond any single decision about honors or recognition. The monarchy was at a crossroads, trying to balance respect for tradition with the need to remain relevant and appealing to modern audiences. Perhaps we need to step back and think about this more systematically, Camilla suggested. Instead of making dramatic gestures that might backfire, we could consider more gradual ways to recognize Kate's contributions while maintaining family harmony. Charles appreciated his wife's constructive approach to problem solving. This was the kind of thoughtful dialogue he should have initiated from the beginning, rather than presenting her with a fait accompli that left no room for input or modification. What if we scheduled a family meeting to discuss recognition and honors more broadly? Charles proposed. We could explore ways to acknowledge everyone's contributions while also finding special ways to highlight Kate's unique role as the future queen consort. Camilla considered this suggestion, recognizing that it represented a significant departure from Charles's original approach. Instead of making unilateral decisions, he was now proposing a collaborative process that would involve the affected family members in finding solutions. That could work, Camilla agreed cautiously, but only if you're genuinely open to the possibility that the family might suggest alternatives to your original plan. You can't simply use the meeting to build support for a decision you've already made. Charles knew that his wife was testing his commitment to real collaboration versus the appearance of consultation. Her challenge was fair, given how he had handled the situation initially, and he realized that rebuilding trust would require demonstrating genuine openness to different outcomes. I promise you that I'll approach any family discussion with an open mind, Charles said solemnly. My goal is to strengthen our family and the monarchy, and if that means reconsidering my original plans, then I'm willing to do that. The conversation between Charles and Camilla continued late into the evening, covering not just the immediate issue of Kate's honor, but broader questions about decision-making, communication, and partnership within their marriage and the royal family. By the time they finally retired for the night, while tensions remained, both felt that they had begun to rebuild the foundation of trust and respect that had been damaged by the morning's confrontation. 2 weeks later, the royal family gathered at Windsor Castle for what Charles had diplomatically described as a family consultation on recognition and service. The formal dining room had been transformed into a more casual meeting space, with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle to encourage open discussion rather than hierarchical positioning. Princess Anne arrived first, her practical nature evident in her direct question to Charles as she took her seat. I assume this meeting is about more than just reviewing our charitable commitments for the year. What exactly are we here to discuss? Prince Edward and Sophie entered together, followed by William and Kate, who seemed slightly puzzled by the unusual nature of the gathering. Kate had asked William several times what the meeting might be about, but he had been as mystified as she was by his father's cryptic invitation. Queen Camilla was the last to arrive, having spent extra time preparing herself mentally for what she knew would be a challenging conversation. She had agreed to support Charles's new approach to family decision-making, but she remained concerned about how the discussion would unfold and whether genuine consensus could be achieved. Thank you all for coming, Charles began, his tone more formal than usual family gatherings. I've called this meeting because I've been considering some significant changes to how we recognize service and contribution within our family, and I realize that such decisions shouldn't be made in isolation. Anne immediately leaned forward, her attention fully engaged. Years of royal service had taught her to recognize when important announcements were coming, and she could sense that whatever Charles was about to propose would have major implications for all of them. I had originally planned to announce that Kate would be receiving the Order of the Garter, Charles continued, causing an immediate stir around the room. This would recognize her exceptional service and her role as the future queen consort. The silence that followed was deafening. William's face showed complete surprise, while Kate appeared shocked and somewhat overwhelmed by the unexpected news. Anne's expression was unreadable. but the slight tightening around her eyes suggested that she was processing the full implications of such an honor. However, Charles quickly continued, "My discussions with Camilla have helped me understand that such a decision requires broader family input and consideration of how it might affect all of us." Edward was the first to speak, his diplomatic nature helping him find words that addressed the situation without immediately taking sides. "Father, while Kate's service has indeed been exemplary, the Order of the Garter has traditionally been reserved for those with much longer records of service to the crown." Anne nodded in agreement, her straightforward manner coming to the fore. "I've been serving this family for over 50 years, and while I don't seek recognition for its own sake, I think Edward raises a valid point about precedent and fairness." Kate, who had remained silent during these exchanges, finally found her voice. "Your Majesty, I'm deeply honored that you would consider me for such recognition, but I share the concerns that have been raised. I would never want to accept an honor that might cause division within our family." Her gracious response impressed everyone in the room, including Anne, who had been prepared to be more critical of the proposal. Kate's immediate concern for family harmony over personal recognition demonstrated exactly the kind of character that had impressed Charles in the first place. "Perhaps we could consider a different approach," Sophie suggested thoughtfully. "Instead of focusing on one dramatic honor, we might think about creating new ways to recognize different types of contribution and service." William, who had been processing the shocking news about his wife, finally spoke up. "I appreciate Father's desire to recognize Kate's work, but I agree that we need to be thoughtful about how we approach this. Kate's contributions are valuable precisely because they come from genuine commitment, not from seeking recognition." Camilla watched the discussion unfold with growing satisfaction. The collaborative approach was producing exactly the kind of thoughtful consideration that had been missing from Charles's original decision-making process. Family members were able to express their views honestly, while still showing respect for each other's perspectives. "What if we established a new honor specifically recognizing contributions to modernizing the monarchy?" Charles proposed, beginning to see possibilities for compromise that hadn't occurred to him before. This could acknowledge Kate's unique role while also creating opportunities to recognize other types of service in the future. Anne considered this suggestion carefully. That could work, provided it's done thoughtfully and doesn't diminish the significance of existing honors. "We need to be careful not to create a complicated system that confuses the public or undermines traditional recognition." The conversation continued for several hours, with family members exploring various alternatives and possibilities. Gradually, a consensus emerged around the idea of creating new forms of recognition that could acknowledge different types of contribution without disrupting the traditional hierarchy of honors. Kate remained largely quiet during most of the discussion, speaking only when directly asked for her opinion. Her obvious discomfort with being the center of such attention was noted by everyone present, and it actually strengthened the family's resolve to find a solution that wouldn't put her in an awkward position. By the end of the meeting, the family had agreed to establish a new recognition program that would acknowledge innovative contributions to royal service, with Kate being the first recipient. This would honor her unique approach to royal duties while creating a framework that could recognize others in the future without undermining traditional honors. Charles felt deeply grateful for his family's thoughtful engagement with the issue. The collaborative process had produced a much better outcome than his original plan, and it had strengthened family relationships rather than threatening them. As the family prepared to leave Windsor Castle, Camilla approached Charles privately. "I'm proud of how you handled that," she said warmly, their relationship having largely recovered from the earlier conflict. "This outcome is much better than what you originally planned." Charles nodded, understanding that he had learned valuable lessons about leadership, collaboration, and the importance of considering multiple perspectives before making major decisions. The experience had strengthened both his marriage and his relationships with other family members. Kate and William drove back to London in thoughtful silence, both processing the day's revelations. Kate eventually spoke first, expressing her relief that the family had found a solution that felt fair and considerate to everyone involved. "I'm just glad we can move forward without creating any lasting tensions," Kate said. "Recognition is meaningful, but family harmony is much more important to me." William smiled at his wife's response, understanding once again why his father had been so impressed with her character and judgment. The day had demonstrated that the royal family, despite their occasional disagreements, remained capable of working together to find solutions that served both individual and institutional interests.